There's a parable, Schopenhauer whispered one winter evening, while the frost painted death flowers on his window. Picture it, a cluster of hedgehogs, shivering in the cruel December wind. They huddle together for warmth, desperate for connection, for that sweet animal heat that promises survival. But the moment they press close, their quills pierce each other's flesh. They recoil in pain, separate, and the cold returns like a familiar demon. So they dance this grotesque waltz, together, apart, bleeding and freezing by turns. This, my dear listener, is you. This is every man who has ever reached for another body in the dark, only to discover that intimacy carries its own exquisite torture. I once knew a man, let's call him Marcus, who collected lovers like some men collect vintage wines. Each relationship began with that familiar intoxication, the racing pulse, the stolen glances, the delicious ache of anticipation. He'd describe it to me over whiskey, his eyes glazed with that particular madness we mistake for enlightenment. "This time," he'd say, "this time it's different. She understands me." But understanding, you see, is the first betrayal. The moment someone truly sees you, sees past the carefully curated persona, the rehearsed stories, the strategic vulnerabilities you deploy like weapons, that's when the quills emerge. Marcus would watch, horrified, as each new love transformed from salvation into suffocation. The very qualities that drew him in became unbearable. Her laugh, once musical, now grated like fingernails on glass. Her need for morning conversation felt like an assault on his solitude. Her tears, which once moved him to heroic displays of comfort, became manipulative theater. And here's the sick joke. She felt the same. They always do. Recent studies from behavioral psychologists, those modern priests of the obvious, confirm what Schopenhauer knew in his bones. The phenomenon they call hedonic adaptation ensures that the very neurochemistry of attraction contains its own expiration date. Those floods of dopamine and oxytocin that make new lovers feel like gods, they diminish, not gradually, but according to a cruel mathematical precision. 18 months to 3 years, they say, measuring heartbreak with the same instruments they use for lab rats. But we're not lab rats, are we? We're conscious beings cursed with memory and imagination. We remember the high and spend the rest of our days chasing it like junkies, each new relationship a desperate attempt to recapture that first, pure hit of meaning. Let me paint you a scene. It's 3 in the morning. You're lying next to someone whose body you know better than your own. The streetlight outside casts amber shadows across the ceiling, shadows you've memorized over countless sleepless nights. Their breathing has that particular rhythm that means they're pretending to sleep, just as you are. Both of you lie there, two actors who've forgotten they're in a play, going through the motions of intimacy while your souls scream in separate cages. This is what we don't talk about at dinner parties. This is the secret that would unravel civilization if we all admitted it at once. Most long-term relationships are elaborate performances of connection. Two people agreeing to a mutual delusion because the alternative, true solitude, seems worse. But is it worse? Really? The ancient Stoics had a word, ataraxia, a state of serene indifference, of being sufficient unto oneself. They spoke of it like a fortress, impregnable to the slings and arrows of attachment. Modern men mock this as emotional deadness, as if feeling nothing were worse than feeling everything and drowning in it. Yet I've seen men find strange peace in their fortresses. After Marcus's 7th devastating breakup, this one cost him his house and half his retirement, I found him one evening in his empty apartment, sitting on the floor with nothing but a mattress and a coffee maker. He was reading Epictetus by candlelight. The electricity wasn't connected yet, and when he looked up at me, his eyes held something I'd never seen before. Not happiness, exactly. Something quieter, something that didn't need a name. "You know what's funny?" he said, his voice carrying that particular exhaustion that comes after you've cried all your tears. "I spent 20 years trying to complete myself with another person, like I was half a circle, desperately seeking my other half. But circles don't work that way, do they? A circle is already complete. It's the joining that breaks it. He was drunk, of course. Philosophy always sounds better with bourbon. But drunk men sometimes stumble into truths that sober men spend lifetimes avoiding. The hedgehog's dilemma has no solution. That's what makes it a dilemma. You can't remove the quills without removing what makes a hedgehog a hedgehog. You can't achieve intimacy without vulnerability, and vulnerability means offering someone the exact roadmap to destroy you. Which they will. Not from malice, usually, but from the simple fact of being human, of having their own quills, their own needs, their own desperate dance between connection and autonomy. Some men choose the cold. They perfect the art of surface relationships, friends with benefits, casual encounters, emotional transactions as clean and simple as buying coffee. They tell themselves they're enlightened, that they've transcended the need for deep connection. But watch them at 3 a.m., scrolling through dating apps with the mechanical persistence of slot machine addicts. The cold has its own pain. Others choose the blood. They dive into relationship after relationship, each time convinced they've learned from past mistakes. They read the books, do the therapy, practice conscious relating, or whatever buzzword the self-help industrial complex is peddling this year. They bleed more skillfully, perhaps. They develop scar tissue, but they still bleed, and a rare few, the ones who've bled enough and frozen enough, discover something else. Not a solution, but a different way of holding the dilemma. They learn to dance at precisely the right distance, close enough to feel warmth, far enough to avoid the deepest wounds. They master the art of loving without grasping, of being present without being possessed. But even they pay a price. Watch them closely and you'll see it. A certain quality in their smile, like people who've learned a terrible secret and made peace with it. They love, yes, but the way a soldier loves who knows that all things end, that every embrace carries within it the seed of its own departure. Schopenhauer, that old pessimist, died alone in his apartment with only his poodles for company. The cleaning woman found him on his couch, looking peaceful, his last manuscript still open on his desk. In it, he'd written, "A man can be himself only so long as he is alone, and if he does not love solitude, he will not love freedom. For it is only when he is alone that he is really free." So tell me, dear listener, as you sit there in your own amber-lit darkness, how many quills are currently embedded in your flesh? How many times have you performed the dance? Together, apart, until the pattern wore grooves in your soul. And more importantly, what would happen if you simply stopped dancing? Every goddess becomes a cashier, given enough time. Listen closely and you'll hear it. That wet, sucking sound of romance being digested by the machinery of daily life. It starts as a whisper. "Could you pick up milk on the way home?" It ends as a roar. "We need to talk about the credit card bills." I'll tell you a secret that would make troubadours weep into their lutes. Love, in late-stage capitalism, is a business merger disguised as poetry. And like all mergers, it begins with irrational exuberance and ends with someone getting screwed in the fine print. Picture this. A man meets a woman at a bookstore. Yes, they still exist, these temples to dead trees and dying dreams. She's reading Anais Nin in the erotica section, which should be his first warning. But he's intoxicated by the curve of her neck, the way she bites her lower lip at particularly scandalous passages. He approaches with a line he's rehearsed but pretends is spontaneous. She laughs, not at the line, but at his obvious nervousness. It's charming. Everything in those early days is charming. Fast forward 18 months. That same neck now bends over a laptop, calculating mortgage payments. That lip gets bitten during arguments about whose turn it is to call the plumber. The erotica has been replaced by joint tax returns. Anais Nin gathers dust, while TurboTax glows on the screen like some digital deity of the mundane. This is the second curse. Love doesn't die in grand betrayals or passionate fights. It dies in grocery lists and Google calendars, suffocated under the weight of shared Netflix passwords and debates about thread counts. It transforms from poetry to prose, and not even good prose, just the instruction manual for a life neither of you remembers choosing. The ancient Greeks knew this. That's why they had different words for love. Eros for passion, philia for friendship, agape for the divine. We modern fools try to make one person fulfill all three, like asking a violin to also be a refrigerator and a spiritual advisor. Then we wonder why the music stops. But here's where it gets truly perverse. We've built an entire economic system that depends on this transformation. The wedding industry, that $70 billion annual fever dream, sells you the climax of romance. The mortgage industry sells you the aftermath. Between them lies an entire ecosystem of couples therapists, divorce lawyers, dating apps, and self-help gurus, all feeding on the corpse of Eros like particularly well-dressed vultures. I knew a couple, let's call them David and Sarah, who tried to resist this economy. They were philosophers, both of them, which is another way of saying they were professionally impractical. They swore they'd never let their love become transactional. No joint accounts, no shared leases. They'd meet as equals, as artists of existence, every encounter a choice rather than an obligation. For 3 years, it worked. Their love had the quality of stolen moments, hotel rooms paid in cash, letters sent to separate addresses, conversations that lasted until dawn because neither had to wake up in the same bed. Friends envied their passion. "You two are like teenagers," they'd say, not realizing this was precisely the problem. Because teenagers, you see, don't have to pay rent. The cracks showed first in small resentments. Why did he always choose the restaurants? Why did she never offer to pay? She made less money, adjunct professor wages being what they are. But pointing this out violated their unspoken agreement to ignore material reality. When David's father got sick, Sarah wasn't on the hospital's approved visitor list. When Sarah's apartment flooded, she couldn't crash at David's because his lease didn't allow extended guests. They'd tried to keep love pure, untainted by the vulgar mathematics of cohabitation. Instead, they discovered that in a world built on couples' privileges, tax breaks, health insurance, next of kin rights, their purity was its own kind of poverty. The last time I saw them together, they were signing a lease. Sarah's hand shook as she held the pen. David stared at the wall behind the property manager's head, where a motivational poster proclaimed, "Home is where the heart is," in Comic Sans font. The irony was so heavy it had its own gravitational pull. "We're not giving up," Sarah told me later, over wine that tasted like defeat. "We're being practical." But practicality is where passion goes to die, wrapped in sensible sheets with a reasonable thread count. The behavioral economists, those prophets of our decline, have a term for this: the commodification of intimacy. They've done studies where they can predict relationship satisfaction based on financial entanglement. The more your lives merge economically, the more your love becomes a cost-benefit analysis. Who contributes more? Who sacrifices more? Who owes whom? Every "I love you" carries an invisible price tag. Every orgasm gets weighed against outstanding emotional debts. The bedroom becomes a marketplace where affection is currency and everyone's keeping books. And here's the truly sick part. We know this. We all know this. Yet we persist in the grand delusion, posting couple photos on social media like advertisements for a product we're not even sure we want anymore. We attend weddings and applaud the exchange of vows that are essentially contracts with terrible terms and no escape clause that doesn't cost a fortune. Why? Because the alternative, facing the economy of solitude, seems worse. A man alone must pay full rent. He must cook his own meals or pay for takeout. He must either embrace the echo of his own voice or pay for therapy to have someone listen. The couple's economy, even with all its degradations, offers bulk discounts on loneliness. But some men are discovering what David discovered after Sarah left him for someone more emotionally available. Red, willing to combine checking accounts. Sitting in his empty apartment, paying full rent for the first time in 2 years, he felt something unexpected: relief. The exhausting mathematics of merged existence, who owed whom what, who sacrificed more, whose turn it was. All of it vanished like a fever breaking. He told me, over bourbon, it's always bourbon with these revelations. "You know what I realized? I'd been so busy managing the business of us that I'd forgotten the simple pleasure of being myself. I can leave dishes in the sink without it becoming a symbol of disrespect. I can spend money on books without justifying their practical value. I can be wasteful with my own time without someone calculating its opportunity cost. The Stoics, those ancient masters of emotional accounting, understood that the highest freedom was autarkia, self-sufficiency, not the lonely kind that comes from inability to connect, but the kind that comes from choosing your own company over the exhausting negotiations of perpetual merger. Modern research, published just this year in fact, shows that men who live alone between relationships report higher life satisfaction than those who jump from merger to merger. They rediscover hobbies abandoned for couples' activities. They reconnect with friends previously filtered through a partner's approval. They remember what their own opinions sound like without the echo chamber of compromise. But this wisdom comes at a price. To choose solitude in a couple's economy is to accept a kind of exile. Restaurant hosts look at you with pity when you ask for a table for one. Wedding invitations include painful +1 assumptions. The tax code itself punishes your autonomy. Yet more and more men are making this choice, becoming what I call economic monks, not celibate but careful. They date without merging. They love without incorporating. They've learned the secret that the wedding industrial complex doesn't want you to know. You can have intimacy without an intimate financial partnership. You can share bodies without sharing bank accounts. You can love someone deeply while maintaining separate Netflix profiles. It's not romantic. The poets would hate it. But then again, the poets never had to split a Costco membership. So here's my question for you, dear listener. As you sit there calculating the emotional ROI of your last relationship, what would happen if you stopped trying to extract value from love? What if you treated it like art? Something you create for its own sake, knowing it will never pay the rent? And more provocatively, what if being alone isn't a failure of the couple's economy, but a radical act of resistance against it? We perform our damage like a script we've memorized in the dark. Small poem whispered at 4 a.m. The moth returns to flame. Not from stupidity, but because burning feels like home. Have you ever watched a moth circle a candle? Really watched, with the patience of the damned. It doesn't fly straight into the fire. No, that would be too merciful. It dances around the edges, each pass bringing it closer, its papery wings singing from the heat. It knows. God help me, it knows what's coming. But the light calls to something deeper than survival. We are all moths, and our childhood wounds are the flame. Let me tell you about patterns, not the kind you find in wallpaper or Persian rugs, but the invisible grooves worn into your psyche before you had words to name them. Freud called it the repetition compulsion. The Buddhists call it samsara. I call it the most elegant torture device ever conceived. The human need to recreate our first wounds in hope of a different ending. Here's how it works. A boy grows up with a father who speaks fluent silence. Not the comfortable quiet of companionship, but the arctic absence of a man who checked out of fatherhood without ever leaving the house. The boy learns to decode love through absence, to measure affection in the negative space between words. Fast forward 20 years. Watch him fall in love with women who specialize in emotional withholding. Watch him mistake distance for depth, confuse unavailability with mystery. He doesn't seek warmth. He seeks the familiar chill of being unseen. Or consider another. A boy whose mother loves like a hurricane, all-consuming, boundary-dissolving, suffocating. Her anxiety becomes his oxygen. Her needs eclipse his own until he can't tell where she ends and he begins. Decades later, he runs from any woman who shows genuine interest. Intimacy feels like drowning. He sabotages connection with the efficiency of a trained assassin, then wonders why he's always alone. The perverse genius of this system is that we're not attracted to what's good for us. We're attracted to what's familiar. And if familiar means damaged, well then, pass the matches and let's dance. I once attended a wedding, a grotesque pageant of denial if ever there was one. The groom, Martin, had been in therapy for years, working on himself, as they say. as if the self were a broken carburetor that just needs the right tool. He'd mapped his patterns, named his triggers, done the work. His bride, Angela, had her own collection of therapeutic insights, her own practiced vocabulary of healing. During the reception, I watched them perform their damage for each other with the precision of seasoned actors. When she laughed too loud at another man's joke, "There, see the micro-flinch in Martin's jaw? That's his father's disapproval, perfectly recreated." When he forgot to introduce her to his college friends, watch her eyes go glassy. Watch her smile become armor. That's her mother's invisibility, served fresh. They knew. That's the horror of it. Both of them knew exactly what they were doing. Could probably name the childhood scene they were reenacting. But knowledge and wisdom are different countries, and most of us die without a passport. The modern therapy industrial complex would have you believe that awareness is cure. Once you understand your patterns, they promise, you can change them. But this is like saying once you understand gravity, you can fly. Understanding why you're drawn to the flame doesn't make the light less hypnotic. Recent neuroscience, and how I've grown to loathe that word, that promise of material explanation for spiritual disease, tells us that trauma, literally, rewires the brain. The pathways carved by early pain become superhighways. Everything else is a deer path by comparison. We don't choose our attractions any more than we choose our heartbeat. The body remembers what the mind tries to forget. But here's where it gets truly dark. We don't just seek our familiar damage in others. We actively recruit people to play roles in our private psychodramas. It's an unconscious audition process, brilliant in its subtlety. We test potential partners with invisible questions. Will you abandon me at just the right depth? Will you engulf me with the precise pressure I remember? Can you disappoint me in exactly the way I need? And when we find someone whose damage complementary to ours, that's when we call it chemistry. Consider the elegant hell of the anxious avoidant trap, that most common of modern romantic tortures. The anxious one pursues, desperate to close the gap, to merge, to never be abandoned again. The avoidant one retreats, desperate for space, for autonomy, for the safety of distance. Each triggers the other's deepest wound with surgical precision. They're perfect for each other in the way that locks and keys are perfect, designed to fit, but only to keep doors closed. I knew a man, brilliant psychiatrist actually, who mapped out his entire romantic history on a whiteboard. Every woman he'd ever loved, their psychological profiles, their patterns. The board looked like a serial killer's planning document. But when he stepped back, the pattern was so clear it could have been used in textbooks. Every single one was a variation of his alcoholic mother. Different faces, same emotional unavailability. Different names, same tendency to promise presence and deliver absence. "I see it," he told me, pointing at his board like a general explaining a forever war. "I see exactly what I'm doing. And next time," he actually said this with a straight face, "next time I'll choose differently." 6 months later, he was engaged to a functional alcoholic who worked in pharmaceutical sales. The universe, it seems, has a sense of humor darker than Schopenhauer's. But wait, there's a twist in this tale of compulsion. Some men, the rarest breed, learn to dance with their patterns without being consumed. They don't transcend their wounds. That's New Age nonsense. They don't heal them. That's therapeutic propaganda. They simply learn to recognize the heat before their wings catch fire. These men develop what I call wound consciousness. They know they'll always be attracted to a certain type of damage, but instead of diving in or running away, they learn to orbit at a safe distance. They date their patterns, but don't marry them. They acknowledge the attraction without surrendering to it. It's not healing. It's harm reduction for the heart. One such man told me his secret. "I only date women I'm moderately attracted to. If I feel that pull, that deep cosmic recognition, I run. That feeling isn't love. It's my trauma recognizing a playmate." Is this cynical? Perhaps, but it's also practical. He's been happily partnered for 5 years with a woman who doesn't make his wounds sing. Their relationship lacks the operatic highs and lows of trauma bonding. Instead, they have something rarer: peace. Actual, sustainable peace. It's boring in the way that not being on fire is boring when you're used to burning. The mystics say we repeat patterns until we learn the lesson they're trying to teach. But I think that's giving the universe too much credit. We repeat patterns because we're biological machines running outdated software. The moth doesn't circle the flame seeking enlightenment. It circles because millions of years of evolution taught it to navigate by the moon, and it can't tell the difference between celestial body and candle. We can't debug our programming, but we can learn to recognize when it's running. That moment when you meet someone and feel that electric recognition, that sense of coming home, that's not destiny. That's your damage recognizing a dance partner. So here's my challenge to you, you beautiful damaged moth. The next time you feel that familiar pull, that siren song of, "This one's different," pause. Ask yourself, does this feel exciting because it's new, or because it's the oldest story I know? Am I drawn to the light because it illuminates, or because I've learned to call burning love? And if you're very brave, braver than most, try this. Choose someone who doesn't fit your pattern. Date someone who makes your wounds yawn with boredom. See what happens when you stop casting the same play with different actors. You might discover something terrible. That healthy love is quiet. So quiet you might mistake it for absence. But it's not absence. It's the sound of wings not burning. When she loves your performance, not your person. Here's a dangerous secret I shouldn't tell you. Women don't fall in love with you. They fall in love with how you make them feel about themselves. And the moment you stop being their magic mirror, the second you fail to reflect back their idealized self-image, watch how quickly Juliet becomes Lady Macbeth. But before you nod too eagerly, know this. You're doing it too. We're all Narcissus, just with better technology. Let me paint you a scene from the Museum of Modern Romance. A dimly lit wine bar, all exposed brick and Edison bulbs. Instagram's wet dream. She laughs at his joke, not because it's funny, it isn't, but because her laugh makes her feel like the kind of woman who dates witty men. He orders an obscure wine, not because he likes it, he prefers beer, but because knowing about wine makes him feel sophisticated, and her impressed smile confirms this fiction. They're not on a date. They're in a two-person theater company, performing for an audience of each other, each secretly watching themselves in the other's eyes. This is love in the age of the selfie, an elaborate system of mirrors reflecting mirrors with nothing real at the center. Kierkegaard, that melancholy Dane who understood despair like a sommelier understands wine, wrote about the sickness unto death, the disease of being unable to be oneself. But he was an optimist. He thought this was a spiritual crisis. He didn't foresee a world where the self would become a brand, where authenticity would be just another performance, where even our vulnerabilities would be carefully curated for maximum impact. I watched this disease consume my friend James. Successful entrepreneur, the kind of man who uses disrupt unironically. He met Patricia at a charity gala. She was everything his personal brand required. Beautiful, accomplished, looked devastating in a cocktail dress. More importantly, she made him feel like the man he'd always wanted to be. Desired, admired, envied. For 2 years, they perfected their performance. Their social media was a masterclass in couples branding. Exotic vacations, candid laughs, strategic demonstrations of affection. Friends commented on how perfect they were together. Couple goals, the digital masses declared, not knowing they were applauding a hologram. But here's what the audience didn't see. The night Patricia cut her hair short without asking him. Just a haircut, you'd think. But James experienced it as betrayal. Why? Because suddenly she didn't match the image in his head, the accessory to his carefully constructed identity. The mirror cracked, and behind it, nothing. Just the terrifying void where a real relationship should have been. She left him 3 months later. Not because of the haircut. That was just the symptom. She left because she finally realized she was dating a man who loved what she represented, not who she was. His LinkedIn profile, she told me, knew her better than he did. The ancient Greeks had a word, kenosis, self-emptying, but they meant it as a spiritual practice, a way of making room for the divine. We've perverted it into something else, emptying ourselves to make room for our performance, becoming hollow so we can echo whatever our audience wants to hear. Modern dating apps have perfected this hollowing. Swipe culture isn't about finding connection. It's about finding the best mirror for your narcissism. We don't read profiles. We scan for compatibility with our self-image. Does being with this person make me feel adventurous, intellectual, desirable? The other person becomes a prop in the movie where we're always the star. The cruelest part? Sometimes the performance is so good, we fool ourselves. We mistake the dopamine hit of successful projection for love. We confuse being admired with being known. We build entire relationships, marriages even, on foundations of mutual delusion, then wonder why they crumble at the first honest word. I once conducted an experiment. Horrible, really, but illuminating. At a dinner party, I asked couples to describe what they loved about each other. The responses were a catalog of reflections. She makes me feel understood. He makes me feel beautiful. She makes me feel important. He makes me feel safe. Me, me, me. Even in describing love, we can't escape the gravitational pull of the self. But one couple surprised me. Been married 40 years. The kind of couple you assume must be dead inside to have lasted so long. When I asked what he loved about her, the old man thought for a long moment, then said, "The way she hums when she thinks no one's listening, always off key, drives me crazy." His wife laughed. 40 years you've never mentioned this." "Why would I?" He shrugged. "It's not for me. It's just you." There it was. Love that didn't reflect, didn't perform, didn't enhance. Love that simply witnessed. But how many of us have the courage for that kind of seeing? How many of us can bear to be loved for our off-key humming rather than our on-stage aria? The neuroscientists, those cartographers of our electrical souls, tell us that romantic love activates the same brain regions as cocaine addiction, but they've missed the more terrifying similarity. Both are fundamentally about the self. The cocaine addict doesn't love cocaine. He loves how cocaine makes him feel. The romantic lover doesn't love their partner. They love who they become in their partner's gaze. Some men, the ones who've had their mirrors shattered enough times, develop what I call reflection immunity. They stop trying to be anyone's fantasy. They show up to dates in their everyday face, speak in their actual voice, admit to fears that don't make them look sensitively masculine. They'd rather be alone than be loved for a performance. These men terrify most women, and most men, because if someone can be that nakedly themselves, it implies the rest of us are acting. It breaks the fourth wall of social theater, and suddenly everyone's makeup looks garish under the house lights. But here's the paradox. These men, these refusers of the Narcissus protocol, often find something they weren't looking for. Partners who've also tired of the performance. Relationships built on mutual disenchantment rather than mutual delusion. It's not romantic. The poets would weep. But it has one advantage over performed love. It's real. The Buddhists speak of right seeing, perceiving reality without the distortions of ego. In romance, this would mean seeing your partner without the overlay of what they do for your self-image. It would mean loving someone who doesn't make you feel like anything in particular, except perhaps more yourself. But most of us aren't Buddhists. We're narcissists with Netflix accounts, swiping through potential mirrors, looking for the one that shows us in the best light. We say we want authentic connection while carefully curating our vulnerabilities. We claim to seek truth while speaking in Instagram captions. So here's my riddle for you, wrapped in velvet and thorns. If you stripped away everything your partner does for your self-image, the status they provide, the desirability they confirm, the identity they validate, would anything remain? Or would you find yourself staring at a stranger, someone you've shared a bed with but never actually met? And more disturbing still, would they find the same if they looked at you? In the myth, Narcissus dies staring at his own reflection, unable to tear himself away. We've updated the story. Now we die staring at ourselves in our lover's eyes, calling it intimacy while drowning in our own image. The only cure, and its bitter medicine, is to practice loving what doesn't reflect, to seek out the opacity in others, the parts that refuse to mirror back your projections, to choose partners who disrupt your self-image rather than confirm it. But who has the stomach for such love? Who can bear to be seen, really seen, without the flattering filter of performance? Perhaps solitude isn't the failure of love, but its beginning. Perhaps we need to sit alone until we can stand our own company without entertainment, until the performance exhausts itself and something real remains. Only then might we be ready to love another person instead of our reflection in their eyes. But I warn you, this kind of love is quieter than you imagine. No violins, no standing ovations, just two people humming off key, witnessed and witnessing, no longer needing to be anyone's magic mirror. Schopenhauer's final joke. We are puppets dancing for our DNA. Let me tell you how the world ends. Not with a bang, not with a whimper, but with a grunt and a sigh and the slow realization that you've been played by your own biology. Schopenhauer, that prophet of pessimism, that connoisseur of cosmic jokes, knew the punchline before the rest of us even heard the setup. He called it the will, that blind, driving force that uses consciousness as its puppet, making us dance to rhythms older than thought. But he was too polite, too Victorian in his metaphors. Let me translate his wisdom into the vulgar tongue of our times. Every romantic pursuit, every love poem, every grand gesture, every whispered promise in the dark, it all serves a single master. Not love, not connection, not even pleasure, but the mindless imperative to replicate DNA, dressed up in the costume of meaning. Picture this scene, repeated in infinite variations since we crawled from the primordial soup. A man sees a woman across a crowded room. His pupils dilate, his heart rate increases. Testosterone and dopamine flood his system like storm surge breaking levees. He thinks he's experiencing attraction, maybe even the beginning of love. But zoom out. Look with Schopenhauer's cold eye. What you're witnessing is a biological algorithm running its program. Viable mate detected. Initiate approach protocol. Deploy resources. Secure reproductive opportunity. The poetry comes later, a story his conscious mind tells to make sense of the puppet strings. But here's where it gets truly dark. The moment of climax, that little death, la petite mort, is also the death of illusion. In that shuddering instant of release, the will achieves its purpose. The puppet strings go slack, and for a terrible moment, you see clearly. Post-coital clarity, they call it. Post-nut clarity, in the eloquent vernacular of Reddit forums. But clarity is too kind a word. What descends is the opposite of enlightenment, the recognition that all your grand passions, your soul-deep connections, your protests of eternal love, were just elaborate foreplay for a biological transaction. I knew a philosopher, brilliant man, could quote Hegel in 3 languages, who described it thus: in the moment after orgasm, I experienced the most profound existential horror of my life. Not because the act was empty, but because I suddenly see that everything leading to it was a lie my body told my mind. The person next to me transforms from goddess to stranger. The urgency that consumed me seconds before reveals itself as a chemical puppet show. And I understand, with terrible clarity, that I am not the author of my desires. I am their vehicle. He tried celibacy for a while, thought he could starve the will, break free from the puppet strings. But the will is patient. It doesn't need your cooperation, only your existence. The fantasies grew more vivid, the dreams more insistent. He lasted 3 months before the dam burst, and he found himself in worse slavery than before. To pornography, to compulsion, to the very force he'd tried to escape. Because here's Schopenhauer's cruelest insight. You can't defeat the will by opposing it. Opposition is just another form of engagement. The ascetic and the hedonist are both puppets. They just dance to different tempos. Consider the modern dating landscape through this lens. Tinder, Bumble, Hinge. What are these but efficient delivery systems for the will? We've stripped courtship of its pretty lies, reduced it to its essential transaction. Swipe, match, meet, mate. The old romantics would be horrified, but Schopenhauer would merely nod. We've simply made explicit what was always implicit. The data supports this brutal interpretation. Studies from 2024 show that relationship satisfaction plummets after the first 2 years, precisely when the neurochemical storm of new relationship energy subsides. The puppets wake up, look at each other without the drunk goggles of biology, and wonder what the hell they're doing together. But wait, there's more. There's always more in hell. The will doesn't just use pleasure as its puppet strings. It uses pain, too, the agony of rejection, the torture of loneliness, the gnawing emptiness of a bed unshared. These aren't bugs in the system. They're features. The whip to complement the carrot, ensuring you'll keep dancing even when the music turns discordant. A man told me once, tears streaming down his face, about the moment his marriage truly ended. Not when she served the papers, not when she took the kids, but in bed, moments after making love, when she turned to him and said, "I don't feel anything anymore." The will had no more use for their union. The puppet show was over. The strings cut. They saw each other clearly for the first time in years. Two strangers who'd been manipulated into creating 3 children and a mortgage. The ancient Gnostics believed the material world was a prison, created by a malevolent demiurge to trap divine sparks in flesh. They weren't far off. But the demiurge isn't some cosmic tyrant. It's in our cells, coiled in the double helix, writing its story with our lives as ink. Yet, and here's where even Schopenhauer's pessimism cracks, some men find a strange freedom in this knowledge. Not escape from the will, but a kind of dance with it. They recognize the puppet strings without pretending to cut them. They experience desire without mistaking it for destiny. They can even love, but it's a love that includes the comedy of its own conditions. I know a man who greets his morning erections with laughter. "Good morning, master," he says to his biology. "What shall we pretend to want today?" He dates, he desires, he even falls in love, but he does so with what the Buddhists call non-attachment. Not indifference, but a gentle holding that includes its own letting go. These men have discovered something Schopenhauer perhaps missed in his gloom. That consciousness, even puppet consciousness, has its own peculiar dignity. Yes, we dance to biology's tune, but we can choose our steps. We can find grace even in our servitude. We can love the dance even as we recognize the dancer. The real orgasm that devours meaning isn't the physical climax. It's the moment of recognition, that instant when you see through the veils of romance to the machinery beneath. Most men experience this as horror and spend their lives trying to forget it, diving back into the illusion with increasing desperation. But a few, the philosophical comedians, the sacred clowns, learn to live with the joke. They love knowing its biology. They commit knowing its chemistry. They build meaning knowing it's ultimately meaningless. Not because they're nihilists, but because they've discovered something on the other side of meaning. The simple animal joy of being alive, even as a puppet. So here's my final question, posed at the edge of the abyss. Tomorrow morning, when desire stirs in you like a serpent waking, when the will tugs at your strings and demands its dance, will you pretend you're choosing? Or will you dance anyway, eyes open, laughing at the cosmic joke of your own existence? And perhaps most importantly, is there really any difference? The serpent swallows its tail. The puppet realizes it enjoys the show. And somewhere, in whatever passes for the afterlife of pessimist philosophers, Schopenhauer is either weeping or laughing. I suspect both.